Britain is a lucky country to boast so many true giants of comedy. In Billy Connolly, a pioneering stand-up. In Monty Python, genius surrealists. In Charlie Chaplin, a disgusting domestic abuser. No list of British comedy greats would be complete without Arthur Speckles, who entertained the nation with his enormously imaginative sketch writing and magnetic on-stage persona.
The 70s and 80s had so many amazing comedy acts. Morecambe and Wise, the Pythons, the Young Ones. And considering all that, I think Arthur Speckles really is one of those.
It was just a right good laugh and that, you know. Like you could just laugh at him, you know.
In the 2 weeks since he died, the British public has been pouring out their love and admiration for him.
What do you think of Arthur Speckles? You know Arthur Speckles, the comedian?
No.
He's a comedian?
I've never heard of him.
No?
Never.
I don't know who Arthur Speckles is.
It's not going to be a problem.
He died the other week.
Oh, that's sad.
How old was he?
72.
Oh, that's good.
What do you think of Arthur Speckles? You know Arthur Speckles, the comedian?
But where did this inspirational comedian come from? He might only have been dead 2 weeks, but the Lancaster University Comedy Institute thinks it's appropriate to pull aside the veil and dig into his personal life to reveal the man behind the magic. This is the life and laughs of Arthur Speckles.
Arthur Speckles was born in 1950 to Henry and Henrietta Speckles. He was the last of 6 siblings, and the family lived here in Grudgeworth, a small fishing town on the Lancashire coast.
Nowadays, Grudgeworth is a thriving village. It has its own Nisa local, and the fish and chip shop recently achieved its first ever satisfactory food hygiene rating. But back in the 50s, it was a very poor town.
The people of Grudgeworth didn't have a pot to piss in. All, that is, except the Speckles family, who had literally nothing except a pot to piss in. The family made money by charging the townsfolk to piss in their piss pot because no one else had a pot to piss in.
They may have been poor, but the Speckles family home was one full of laughter. Arthur always said his comedy influences started when he was very young. You could say it was inevitable that he would go on to become a comedian, but stardom would have to wait, because when he was 17, first love came his way.
So, Miss Speckles Pilchard, you've written a number of books about Arthur, haven't you?
Yes, 3. In fact, the latest one is out right now.
Yes, maybe later?
Oh.
Thank you. Why do you think you're still writing about your relationship after all these years?
Well, Arthur lived a long and fantastic life, and writing about it makes me a fantastic amount of money. But I think the part that we shared together will always be special. You see, I knew Arthur before the fame. Long before. Years before. I was his babysitter. I spent so much time at the Speckles house because their parents were always out trying to earn money for the kids. Mrs. Speckles was a night nurse at the nearest hospital, and Mr. Speckles had to take the family piss pot round to the elderly and infirm. I'll admit, I babysat all the Speckles children at one time or another, but it was always Arthur. Of course, I had a duty of care. Nothing happened between us at that time. It wasn't until later, when he was 17 and I was 22, that I gave him his first hand job.
The young couple had a whirlwind romance and married 6 months after first confessing their love.
Arthur was an inspiration to so many people, but only I got to know the true him. I knew his most secret dreams, his most private thoughts. I knew his mannerisms, the way his foot would jump when he was anxious, the way he'd scratch his head when he was thinking, the way his eyes would scrunkle up when he was...
Happy?
Sexually aroused.
Oh.
He was a beautiful, complex human being, and it was my pleasure to see the full picture. Not like those disgusting creatures he married later. I bet none of them could bring out a tell-all book like this. $14.99 in Waterstones.
So here is Arthur Speckles, a young man in love with his young wife and full of creativity and energy. But now he had to support himself and Joni. His comedy dreams would have to wait. It was time to find work.
Arthur worked here at Grudgeworth's lifeboat station, where he found the final push to pursue a career in comedy.
Arthur Speckles. Aye, I remember him.
Is it true that you were the man who inspired him to become a comedian?
Well, certainly it was what was best for everybody. Arthur's job was to take the calls that came into the station. People would ring up reporting trouble at sea and he would alert the crew of the lifeboat. The thing was, all he did was sit scribbling down sketches and funny lines all day. He barely ever answered the phone, and when he did, he'd just ask the caller if they liked his new joke, and if they didn't, he'd hang up. One day, Arthur was on duty when a call comes in. A bloke had been out in his motorboat and run out of fuel, so he needed towing back in. But Arthur was writing a sketch and didn't answer. The poor fella in the boat ended up drifting for hours, all the way to Hawaii.
Okay, so what did you do?
Well, it's hard to know what to do in that situation, but I took Arthur aside and said, "You know, son, I think comedy is where your heart is. Maybe you should go and become a comedian now, like right now, before someone gets hurt." I still remember him walking out of the station on his last day, still cracking jokes and thinking, thank fuck it's over.
For the rest of the 1970s, Arthur did all he could to make it big. But before we look at the start of Arthur's career, it's important to understand the comedy culture he was coming into.
Well, the comedy landscape of the 1970s and the 1980s was quite unusual. All the biggest names in comedy, which in this case means the most famous comedians, came from a rather upper class background. They were following in the footsteps of Oscar Wilde, who was a famous Victorian writer and homosexual. Just like him, they were well educated, they were witty, they were articulate, and had been forced to hide in the closet all their lives.
Well, I must very well start by making one thing superlatively clear. What people say about purveyors of wit, such as myself, what they say about us not working hard for our success is pure, top-hole, matured for 10 years in an oak barrel poppycock. I worked hard for every sketch, every joke. I tell you, when I decided I wanted to disseminate humour into the great unwashed, I secluded myself from everything just so I could write for 2 months straight. Also, I could secure my first appearance on the televisual box.
2 months?
Yes.
Wow. What did you do to support yourself in that time?
I left Cambridge for my mother's father's estate in Wiltshire. The place has been left empty for nearly 40 years. There were barely 50 bottles of port in the cellar. To tell you the truth, I became a recluse for those 2 months while I was writing. Just me and a staff of 50 servants. But you must understand, that was the work ethic of my generation. Not like these northern yobs who come to mooch off the BBC's benefit. I tell you, I don't think one of those grotty peasants has ever taken a...
By the early 80s, the days of upper-class comics, like Lord Pierce, Hamish, Rupert, etc., were numbered.
At that time, in the late 1970s to the early 1980s, new opportunities were emerging for working class people to get famous. Like becoming a serial killer. You know, people like the Yorkshire Ripper were really putting ordinary northern people on the map.
But for northerners like Arthur, who couldn't afford cars to pick up women and then dump their bodies, there were other ways to find stardom. The path that Arthur chose was that of the TV talent show. And in 1981, when Britain first saw the Speckles magic on their screens, the most popular talent show of all was, of course, Britain's Got the Most Marketable Sob Stories.
On average, 60 million people tuned in to watch Britain's Got the Most Marketable Sob Stories every Saturday night, which is impressive, considering that in 1981, only 56 million people lived in Britain. How did they do it? We'll never know. The premise of the show was simple. Contestants from all over the country would get one chance to impress the judges.
And what's your sob story?
I'm a juggler, but I haven't got any arms.
And what's your sob story?
I'm too handsome.
And what's your sob story?
Same as last time. I keep coming on this show and getting rejected.
I remember watching Britain's Got the Most Marketable Sob Stories when I was a child. Everyone had a sob story, but most of them just couldn't be marketed. But when Arthur Speckles stepped on stage, you could tell there was something different.
And what's your sob story?
I'm northern.
That night in 1981, Arthur took the judges and the viewing public by storm. He sailed through the competition. After such an amazing performance, it was only logical that stardom would be the next step. But fate had a little curveball to throw before Arthur became a household name.
It just so happened that there was another hungry, young northern comedian on Britain's Got the Most Marketable Sub-Stories that night. A lad from Bradford called Terry Mole.
Terry impressed the judges just as much as Arthur did. His sob story was that his father was Southern, and they thought they could really market that. And Simon Coward noticed how similar they were. You know, they were both gifted comedians, both ambitious, both male, both Sagittarius, and Simon Coward showed the same genius for entertainment as he did when he formed One Direction. He decided that these completely unrelated people would be even more successful if they were forced to work together.
So, Mr. Mole, can you remember the first time you ever met Arthur Speckles?
Well, yes, I can, as a matter of fact. It was just after the final of Britain's Got the Most Marketable Sub-Stories. There was a bit of a party afterwards, so the great and the good of the comedy were there. I was just minding my own business, when suddenly Simon Coward came over and said, "Hey Terry, loved your show, I'd like you to meet someone." He walked me across the room. There was Arthur. We'd sort of crossed paths backstage, but never properly spoken. And there he was, this towering fella absolutely holding court. Everyone around him was crazy up with laughing.
Still joking away, was he?
No. He was trying to set fire to his farts. And I looked at him and I thought, oh dear Christ alive. It wasn't an obvious match. We did two very different styles of comedy.
So, since you were so different, what made Simon Coward think you'd work well together?
Well, Simon saw we could work well together because we had that special something that all the great comedy double acts have. The number of syllables in our names.
I beg your pardon?
Well, you know, the syllables. Morecambe and Wise. Cannon and Ball. Mitchell and Webb. Speckles and Mole. It just fit.
So now, armed with watertight branding, these two young, hungry northern comedians were ready to conquer the world. But they were new to the industry, inexperienced, and in many ways, fucking stupid. What they really needed was an agent with the passion and knowledge to guide them on their way. A year later, they found one in the shape of Mike Middlefinger.
So, Mike, could you tell us a little bit about what it was like to be a comedy agent back in the 80s?
Well, the first thing you've got to understand is I was only ever interested in the North. Nowhere else on this planet can you get a pint for less money.
Alright, So you were specifically looking for northern talent when Speckles and Mole came along?
Oh, fucking hell yeah. I mean, what a lot of people don't know is back then, the North was buzzing with talent, you know what I mean? Like back then, if you threw a stone at someone in the North, you had a good chance of hitting the next potential movie star, or rock star, or comedy star. I mean, I used to literally go around throwing stones at people, and if they turned around and said, "Hey, what you doing? I'm a performer," I'd be like, "You're fucking signed, mate." That's how I got Sean Bean.
Oh, Mike. Yeah, Mike's a really good lad, is Mike. Yeah, really good lad, Mike. Yeah, really good lad.
So when that posh tosser, Simon Coward, rang me up and said, "I've got these two northern lads ready to take the comedy world by storm," I knew we could be onto a winner.
As soon as he signed Arthur and Terry, Mike Middlefinger set about using his considerable influence to get them on the map. And after 2 years of kicking down office doors at the BBC and threatening to stamp important executives to death, he finally landed them a 45-minute slot every Saturday night. That slot became the iconic sketch show Speckles and Mole.
In a show that ran from March 1984 till December 1989, Arthur Speckles' whip-smart sketch writing kept audiences howling with laughter. Every pratfall, every ridiculous prop, every witty line had audiences transfixed.
So, looking back, Terry, how proud are you of the show Speckles and Mole?
Fairly proud.
Care to elaborate?
No.
All may have been smiles and laughs on stage, but behind the scenes, all was not well at Speckles and Mole.
When Speckles and Mole was at its height, Arthur and I lived just across the street from Terry, and as time went on, you could tell things were going badly. It was just little things at first that gradually built up over time. So Terry stopped coming over for tea. They wouldn't meet anymore to discuss work. Every now and then, Arthur would deliberately reverse our car into Terry's garden fence. Sometimes, Terry would stand in his bedroom window, aiming a crossbow directly into Arthur's study. They were just growing apart as people. It was terribly sad.
Could you tell us, please, in your own words, why you think your professional relationship began to struggle?
Well, it's like I've already said. We were very different people and we were meant to work together, but everyone around us kept getting us to do it. We had to pretend we'd been friends since we were kids, like Eric and Ernie. But really, we were friends once, for 5 minutes, in 1986, when we both agreed Margaret Thatcher was a deranged old goose. So we didn't have much in common, but all the sketches we performed were written by Arthur. Not once one of my sketches was accepted or included. It was a one-man show, and I was just a straight man, you know?
Isn't it rich?
Audiences adored them, but if you look carefully at these photos, which were taken near the end of the show's run, you can see the darkness hiding. subtle gestures and looks in their eyes that prove it was only a matter of time for the beloved duo. And every Speckles and Mole fan knows what the final nail in the coffin turned out to be.
So, with all that in mind, what do you think it was that finally finished off your relationship with Arthur?
I admit, it was down to me. And it was one of the worst mistakes you can make when you're in a comedy double act. I met my wife, Clarice Judd, in the mid-late 80s. Clarice was a famous feminist activist. That's one of the things I fell in love with. And what I decided to do was not to make her take my name. Instead, we'd combine the two, so we'd be Mr. and Mrs. Mole Judd.
You have to understand, Speckles and Mole was a perfect comedy duo. Not because the sketches were hilarious, not because they bounced off of each other, not because they both had charming personalities, not because of an appealing height difference. No, it was because their double act name had the perfect syllable structure. If Terry Mole had become Terry Mole Judd, can you imagine Speckles and Mole Judd? No, no, no!
And the producers couldn't have that, could they? I mean, just because I wanted to support what my wife did. I mean, what do you think of that? Just because I wanted to do something positive for my wife. I want to help her make a family statement. Would Arthur have done that? No, it was Speckles all the time. He slapped the name Speckles on anything he thought was his. Me, no, I care about women and I care about other people. I'm a bloody nice guy. But was I Mr. Big Face? Did I get first billing? Did the papers give a toss about me? Did they bollock?
To be honest, I don't have anything to say here, but Terry really went off the deep end, so this is just to fill in the gap where we edited all that out.
Right. Well, now that's out of your system, I was wondering how you feel now about the split from Arthur after all these years.
Ultimately, I think it was healthy for both of us that we went our separate ways. But for me especially, because I no longer had to look at his fucking mug.
When Speckles and Mole ended, it really was the end of an era. Era. That's a lovely word. Era. Era.
Era. After that, I really don't think the comedy scene was ever as invigorating or exciting again. Very sad.
Yes, for a real institution of British comedy, it was the end. But where did that leave its star? Arthur Speckles was on the top of his game when the show ended. He was a beloved household name who people wanted to see. But suddenly, there was nowhere to see him. Unless, of course, you were a stalker. But a truly great artist will always find new ways of getting their creativity out there. And in 1994, after 5 years of obscurity, Arthur returned to our screens in the most unexpected way possible.
Yes, like so many comedians before him, Arthur headed for Hollywood to turn his hand to serious acting. And when I say serious acting, I mean serious acting.
Not many people have seen Arthur's one and only movie credit, but it really is a hidden gem. Arthur plays Max Goldfellow, a racist Vietnam veteran who struggles with his closeted homosexuality, whilst trying desperately to win custody of his daughter in a bitter divorce battle against his wife, who is a journalist fighting to uncover the truth. It's these ordeals, plus his gambling addiction, that test his innocent faith in God, as does the fact that he is dying of cancer. The film is called The Lucky Beggar, and like all weighty, Oscar-worthy movies of its kind, there was only one type of person who had the courage to direct it, someone more famous for being an actor. In this case, Kevin Spacey.
So, what do you two think of Arthur's performance in The Lucky Beggar?
Oh,
That was outstanding.
amazing!
Yeah.
One of my
It was
favourite
breathtaking.
performances.
Yeah, phenomenal.
Oh.
I mean, the way he played that character, you know, it was such a complex and challenging role.
I completely agree. There is so much going on in that character. I know I couldn't have played it. And I've been nominated for 2 BAFTA Film Awards and 8 BAFTA TV Awards, one of which I won. 3 of those award nods were for my acclaimed performance in Sherlock Holmes.
We can skip this bit.
Not to mention, my British Academy Britannia Artist of the Year Award and my 1-2 Oscar nominations.
In fact, Arthur's performance was so profound that it gained him an Oscar nomination. However, what followed was one of the most scandalous events in Academy Award history. And yes, there have been a fuck ton of those.
The 67th Academy Awards, as the Best Actor category in which he was nominated drew nearer, we can only imagine how Arthur must have been feeling. Finally, the moment arrives.
And the Oscar goes to Tom Hanks and Forrest Gump.
You know, I won an Oscar, actually, for my celebrated portrayal of Stephen Hawking. Darling, didn't you also play Stephen Hawking in that TV film Hawking?
Yep.
Thought as much. But you didn't win anything.
No.
So, despite his hard work and dedication, Arthur didn't win his Academy Award. But at least he isn't here now to learn the truth of what happened that night.
And the Oscar goes to Tom Hanks and Forrest Gump.
It turns out Holly Hunter was given the wrong envelope backstage. When she read Tom Hanks's name, she had no idea she was handing the Oscar to the wrong man. As many of you will know, this horrible mistake was only discovered last Tuesday. So for 27 years, Tom Hanks has held an Oscar that was never his to begin with. And now, it's too late to do anything about it. Just look at that smug bastard. If I'd been there, I would have slapped him in the face. After his disappointment at the Oscars, Arthur left America, still sore from his loss and from the night he spent with Michelle Pfeiffer after the ceremony. Arthur returned to the UK and to the work he was meant for, writing comedy. In the first couple of months, he tried some original, boundary-pushing work, much of which is forgotten today. Take, for example, his short-lived radio comedy series called Laughter. Arthur's plan for this show was that families would sit around and listen to it together. The longer the silence grew, the more awkward it would become. Until finally, someone had to laugh to break the tension. As you can imagine, this idea was a little ahead of its time. So Arthur returned to television in a new form, situation comedy.
In nasty schools, headmasters breaking all the rules, having fun and playing fools, smashing up the woodwork tools. All the teachers in the pub, passing round a ready rub, trying not to think of when the lunchtime bell will ring again. Oh, what fun we had, but did it really turn out bad? All I learnt at school was how to bend, not break the rule. Oh, what fun we had, but at the time it seemed so bad. Trying different ways.
Oh, Arthur, I loved that show.
One of the best shows ever on TV.
Oh, there's never been anything to beat it.
Arthur was a sitcom written about Arthur, by Arthur, and entitled Arthur. In it, Arthur played Arthur, a hapless window cleaner. Though he could never have known it, Arthur was originating the trend of comedians writing half-baked sitcoms in which they play barely changed versions of themselves. However, tragically, it was doomed to fail because of a critical mistake Arthur could never have seen coming. Arthur's show, Arthur, premiered on the 7th of October 1996. By sheer terrible coincidence, another show premiered on the exact same day.
Hey, what a wonderful kind of day. Hey! Hey, DW! Hey! Whoa!
Wait, you were asking about the sitcom? I thought you were asking about the cartoon.
There's a sitcom called Arthur? Never heard of it.
Oh, of course I meant the cartoon. Do you think I was going to watch Arthur? I Am So Funny! Speckles, the sitcom? Fuck me, not a chance!
Yes, by sheer fluke, 2 shows called Arthur had premiered on the same day. And the children's show became so popular that it completely eclipsed the sitcom. Arthur was cancelled after just 1 series. As in Arthur's Arthur, not the Aardvark Arthur. That show kept going, and it was fucking great. Arthur didn't work for a few years after his sitcom ended, while he tried to figure out the best place to be. Eventually, in 1999, he took a job as the head writer of a brand new BBC sketch show, Toad in the Hole, which ran for 4 years. You won't find it on the iPlayer these days though, after one of its stars, Robbie Gilligrass, came out as a neo-Nazi. But while Arthur had found a steady job in comedy, his personal life was anything but stable.
Would you feel comfortable talking about Arthur's problems with addiction? It's fine if not.
No, it's all right. People need to hear about these things. It started small. He'd feel low, so he'd have a little bit just to lift him up. But then you know how it works. The body gets used to the little lifts, so you need more and more to feel better. As his career struggled, his depressions got worse, and that meant he had to take more and more of the stuff just to feel normal again. It got to the point where I would find it everywhere around the house. In his desk, in his coat pockets, under his pillow. He literally couldn't be anywhere without it.
That's awful. Did he ever seek professional help?
No, he didn't.
Can I ask why not?
Because no one is willing to talk about jelly baby addiction.
It's true. Arthur Speckles had become addicted to jelly babies. This footage shows just how extreme his usage had become. It just goes to show, you never fully understand what's going on behind closed doors. They say time waits for no man. Time and the mother of all sugar crashes. In 2003, the same year his time writing Toad in the Hole had ended, Arthur Speckles' body rebelled against his excessive jelly baby consumption.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Arthur was just so ill. All those trips to the dental hygienist. They gave me so many pamphlets about eating your 5 a day, but I just couldn't bring myself to read them. It would have made it all seem too real.
In the condition he was in, Arthur was in no fit state for work. Sources claim he could barely write, his energy was so low. It looked like this would be the end for the great comedian. But not just yet. We've still got the rest of this section to finish.
If there was one thing Arthur was, it was determined. One day when we got back from the hospital, he turned to me and he said, "Marge, I'm not going to die like this." And he was right. He didn't. He ended up dying.
Oh, sorry, madam, sorry. We don't want to spoil the end of the documentary.
Oh. Right. Sorry.
Arthur was as good as his word. From that day on, he pushed himself onto the road to recovery. Progress was slow and would take most of the next 10 years, but little by little, Arthur got back to his old self.
Arthur always said that his recovery was completed when, in 2015, at the age of 65, he became a father for the first time. Finally, he had become a family man. He adored his son, Harvey, with all his heart.
The introduction of little Harvey sparked the last great creative phase of Arthur's life. It would be a few years before he returned to our screens, but the bedtime stories he told his baby son would lead to the publication of his first novel for children. Here it is. If Dragons Breathe Fire, What Do They Fart? Was published in 2016. The Guardian called it a boring infantile vanity project, and David Walliams called it the greatest literary achievement in human history. With his appetite for imagination whetted, Arthur finally returned to work in comedy, but in a new way. He started writing stand-up and one-man sketches, which he performed to crowds of old fans who were delighted to see him back.
Oh my, look at the time. I'm nearly late for the ball.
However, as with so many things, the highest point comes before the steepest fall. 2 weeks ago, Arthur Speckles was on the card for Laughs at the Lyceum, a great gala of comedy talent.
It was wonderful to see him back, performing in front of such a huge crowd. I was so excited.
So, I've just invented a new word, right? Yeah? It's called plagiarism.
I remember the audience were absolutely screaming with laughter. It was like they were seeing him for the first time.
So, why is a giraffe's neck so long? Because its head is so far away from its body!
Some people say that a curse floats over great comedians. Eric Morecambe died backstage of one of his shows. Tommy Cooper suffered a heart attack live on national television. Now, another great was about to go out doing what he loved.
Arthur actually invited me to Laughs at the Lyceum. I hadn't seen him in years, but I went backstage and we chatted before the show, and then I was on the wings and I watched his set, and he was magic. You know, you never imagine that a legend can go that suddenly, do you?
After all his efforts to improve his health, it seemed there was one last complaint that would finally catch up with Arthur.
And then, so the priest vicar's daughter says to the goose, right?
hell is that?
Seriously?
The audience thought it was part of the show. They just kept laughing.